Eleanor, a woman who carried the quiet grace of 62 years and the indelible sorrow of a widow, stood by the gleaming kitchen counter. Sunlight, filtered through the designer blinds of her daughter's expensive home, illuminated dust motes dancing in the sterile air. She'd woken with a knot in her stomach, a familiar tightening that preceded any significant interaction with Vivian these days. Her daughter, a successful banker, had transformed over the years, not just in stature and wealth, but in a hardening of her edges, a sharpening of her tongue. Eleanor had tried to dismiss it, to attribute it to the pressures of Vivian's demanding career, but the truth gnawed at her. The warmth had seeped out of their relationship, leaving a cold, professional distance. Vivian, already dressed in a sharp power suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, impeccable bun, clattered a coffee mug onto the granite. Her movements were precise, efficient, and imbued with an unspoken impatience. She glanced at the clock, then at Eleanor. Her green eyes, once so bright and full of childish wonder, now seemed to assess, to weigh. Eleanor felt a familiar prickle of nervousness. This house, for all its opulence, had become a gilded cage, and Vivian, its sometimes benevolent, often stern keeper. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor clasped her hands, her palms damp. "Vivian, darling," she began, her voice a soft murmur in the expansive kitchen. I have a small favor to ask." Vivian stopped mid-sip, her mug hovering an inch from her lips. Her gaze, usually darting, now fixed on Eleanor. The air thickened. "Yes, mother?" she prompted, her tone clipped, devoid of the endearment Eleanor had hoped for. It wasn't a question, but a demand, for speed, for brevity. "It's just, my Social Security check isn't due for another week," Eleanor explained, her words tripping over each other slightly. She lowered her gaze, finding the immaculate shine of the floor more comforting than her daughter's direct stare. "And I was hoping I could borrow $100? Just until it comes in." The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian froze, her hand still holding the mug aloft. Eleanor dared to look up. Vivian's green eyes, usually so calculating, now narrowed into slits, sharp and piercing. A flicker of something cold, something almost disdainful, crossed her features. "Are you serious right now, Mother?" Vivian finally asked, her voice dangerously low, each word meticulously enunciated. Eleanor's cheeks flushed. She felt a familiar wave of shame wash over her. "Yes, dear. I wanted to get some supplies for the craft fair next month, and a few groceries. The prices have just gotten so high, you know." She offered a small, apologetic smile, hoping to diffuse the tension, but it felt thin and unconvincing even to herself. Then, Vivian laughed. It wasn't a warm, amused chuckle, but a sharp, cutting sound, devoid of humor, that scraped against Eleanor's ears like fingernails on a chalkboard. It made Eleanor feel instantly small, foolish, like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. The sound seemed to mock her very existence. Vivian set her mug down with a decisive thud, the ceramic ringing against the stone. She leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest, a posture that screamed judgment. "Let's review, shall we, Mother?" she began, her voice now dangerously calm, each word a carefully aimed dart. "You live here, in a house I pay for, rent-free. You eat my food, free food. I pay for all the utilities, the internet, your phone. Free utilities, free internet, free phone, free everything, really. You don't have a single expense to worry about." She paused, her eyes raking over Eleanor's face, leaving a trail of discomfort in their wake. "And now you want cash too? If you want money, Mother, go get a job. You leech." The word leech hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. It struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. But it wasn't just leech that Vivian had used before in her angry tirades. Eleanor remembered the particularly vicious fight a few months back. "You're nothing but a sanguisuga," Vivian had hissed, her face contorted with fury, her voice dripping with disdain. Eleanor had looked up the Italian word later. Bloodsucker. The image, the sheer contempt, had burrowed deep into her soul, festering. Lazy. Sanguisuga. Bloodsucker. The words echoed in Eleanor's mind, a cruel counterpoint to the decades of her life. She remembered her own youth, working 2 jobs to put Vivian through private school after her husband had died, sacrificing her own dreams, her own comforts, so that Vivian could have opportunities she never did. She had poured every ounce of her being into raising a strong, independent daughter, and this was her reward. A profound wave of devastation washed over Eleanor. She looked around the immaculate, silent kitchen, at the expensive appliances, the imported tiles, the custom cabinetry. This was Vivian's world, a world Eleanor had helped create, but in which she now felt like an unwelcome parasite, a stain on the pristine perfection. Her daughter, her own flesh and blood, saw her as a burden, a drain. Vivian pushed away from the counter, grabbing her briefcase. The brief interlude was over. "I'm going to be late," she announced, her voice already distant, her focus shifting back to her world of finance and ambition. She paused at the kitchen door, turning to cast one last, cold glance at Eleanor, who stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling utterly exposed and shattered. "You need to figure out how to take care of yourself for once, Mother." Then, Vivian was gone. The faint click of the front door sealing Eleanor's isolation. The silence of the house pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor stumbled to a kitchen chair, sinking onto it, the polished wood suddenly feeling hard and unforgiving beneath her. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, welled in her eyes and streamed down her face, blurring the perfect kitchen into an watercolors of despair. She wasn't just crying for the $100 she needed, or the humiliation she'd just endured. She was crying for the loss of her daughter, the vibrant, loving girl she remembered, who had been replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. She felt defeated, worn down to the bone by years of Vivian's subtle barbs and increasingly overt cruelty. But as the last of the tears fell, something shifted within Eleanor. A different sensation, unfamiliar yet potent, began to stir in the depths of her weary soul. It wasn't just sorrow anymore. It was a slow, simmering anger, a hot ember igniting in the ashes of her dignity. And with that anger came a nascent spark of determination. She had spent too long allowing herself to be belittled, to be made to feel small and worthless. Vivian thought she was a leech? Vivian thought she needed to figure out how to take care of herself? Eleanor slowly wiped her eyes, her gaze hardening, fixing on an invisible point beyond the expensive marble. Tomorrow, she would make a phone call. And tomorrow, she would pay a visit to the imposing glass building downtown where Vivian worked, the very bank that housed her daughter's carefully cultivated empire. Vivian had no idea what she had just unleashed. The lingering sting of Vivian's words, Leech, sanguisuga, still burned. But beneath the pain, a fierce resolve had taken root in Eleanor's heart. Vivian, her own daughter, had grown into a woman who judged others by their perceived utility, their financial contribution, utterly blind to the sacrifices and the profound depths of love that had shaped her upbringing. It was time, Eleanor decided, for Vivian to learn the truth, not just about her parents' past, but about the profound choices they had made, choices that had, ironically, led to Vivian's current, ungracious prosperity. That night, long after Vivian had retired to her opulent master suite, Eleanor found herself in the quiet solitude of her own modest bedroom, a room that felt like a sanctuary from the cold grandeur of the rest of the house. From the back of her closet, she carefully retrieved an old, worn leather briefcase. It belonged to Henry, her late husband, a man whose quiet wisdom and gentle strength still echoed in the chambers of her memory. The leather was supple under her touch, imbued with the scent of time and memory. With a trembling hand, Eleanor unlatched the briefcase. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of official-looking documents, was a thick envelope. She recognized Henry's elegant, sloping handwriting instantly. It was a letter, dated just weeks before his sudden passing, a final testament from the man she loved more than life itself. She settled into the armchair by the window, the moon casting a pale glow into the room, and began to read. Henry's words, even on paper, held the warmth of his voice, the steadfastness of his love. He wrote of their shared journey, of their simple joys, of his unwavering devotion to her and to Vivian. And then, he wrote of something else, something Eleanor already knew, but which now, in the stark light of Vivian's cruelty, resonated with a new, profound significance. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you are reading this, I am no longer with you, and my greatest sorrow will be leaving you behind. We built a beautiful life, you and I, on the principles of honesty, hard work, and the belief that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in character and love. This is why I made the choices I did, choices I hope you will understand and, perhaps, eventually share with our daughter." He went on to explain it all, meticulously, calmly, the early investments, made years ago with their meager savings, that had blossomed beyond their wildest dreams, the small, unassuming tech company he had co-founded with a brilliant, reclusive friend, which had quietly revolutionized an obscure corner of the software industry, a company he had deliberately kept under the radar, its success a closely guarded secret, known only to a handful of trusted individuals. Henry's philosophy had been simple, yet radical. He believed that sudden, immense wealth could corrupt, could change people, could breed entitlement and superficiality. He wanted Vivian to grow up valuing hard work, humility, and inner strength, not the false allure of material possessions. And so, they had lived a life of deliberate modesty, driving used cars, meticulously clipping coupons, repairing rather than replacing. Eleanor remembered countless mornings at the grocery store, Henry patiently waiting as she tallied up discounts, a quiet smile on his face. She'd always admired his pragmatism, his unwavering commitment to his principles, even if it meant denying themselves luxuries they could easily afford. Their only true indulgence had been their small, beloved cabin by the lake, a place of peace and simple beauty, far from any hint of ostentation. "Our fortune," Henry had written, "now stands at approximately $260 million. It is an absurd amount, my love, a testament to luck and timing, more than anything else, but it is there. I have entrusted its management to Mr. Harrison, whom I know you trust implicitly. He understands my intentions. Use it wisely, my Eleanor, for good. And when the time is right, perhaps Vivian will understand why we chose the path of quiet abundance rather than ostentatious display." $260 million. The number, staggering in its magnitude, felt surreal, almost abstract. After Henry's death, engulfed by a grief so profound it had threatened to consume her, Eleanor had found herself adrift. She had clung to Henry's wishes, to his philosophy, like a lifeline. She had entrusted everything to Mr. Harrison, their longtime financial advisor, a man whose discretion and integrity were beyond reproach. And she had deliberately, painstakingly, chosen to withhold the truth from Vivian. She wanted to see her daughter, truly see her, without the distorting lens of immense wealth. She wanted to know if the values they had instilled in her would hold true. The answer, sadly, had been a resounding no. Closing the letter, Eleanor felt a cold, hard resolve settle within her. She picked up her phone, her fingers finding Mr. Harrison's number from memory. It was late, but she knew he would answer. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice steady, surprisingly firm. "It's Eleanor Morrison. I need you to liquidate all of it, every last cent, and prepare for a very large transfer." A beat of silence stretched between them. Mr. Harrison, a man who had navigated the intricate financial landscape for the Morrisons for decades, knew the unspoken history, the hidden depths of their family. He understood. "Eleanor," he replied, his voice calm, professional, yet with a hint of understanding. "Are you certain? This is a significant step." "Never been more certain, Mr. Harrison," Eleanor affirmed, the corner of her lips curving into a tight, almost grim smile. "I need you to meet me tomorrow. At First National Bank. Vivian's bank. First thing in the morning." "Understood," he said, his voice betraying nothing but professional assent. "I'll be there." Hanging up, Eleanor leaned back, her gaze sweeping around the small, comforting room. She thought of Vivian, the bright, curious child who, as a teenager, had argued passionately about social justice, who had written essays about not letting society define her worth. That child had been replaced by a woman who defined others, even her own mother, by what they could provide. It was a bitter pill to swallow, this transformation. She gathered Henry's papers, the weighty documents, the simple, heartfelt letter. The evidence was irrefutable. Tomorrow, Vivian would learn the price of her disdain. Eleanor felt a strange calm wash over her, a quiet reclaiming of herself. She was not a leech. She was not pathetic. She was Eleanor Morrison, a woman who had loved deeply, sacrificed willingly, and who now, after years of quiet endurance, was ready to stand tall. Her pathetic, dependent mother was worth more than Vivian could ever dream. And tomorrow, Vivian would learn that painful truth. At precisely 10 a.m., Eleanor pushed open the heavy glass doors of First National Bank. The air inside was cool, conditioned, and carried the faint scent of polished wood and ink. She wore her best dress, a classic navy blue that her late husband, Henry, had always admired, and her hair was meticulously styled. In her hand, she clutched Henry's worn leather briefcase, its familiar weight a comforting anchor. Her heart, surprisingly, was steady. Her mind, remarkably, was clear. The turmoil of yesterday had receded, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. Her gaze swept across the bustling lobby, past the rows of polished tellers, the discreet customer service desks, and the hushed corners where loan officers met with clients. There she was, Vivian, her blonde hair impeccably coiffed, her sharp suit a testament to her professional ambition. Vivian sat behind one of the teller counters, her head bent over a stack of papers, her focused expression confirming her dedication to her work. She hadn't noticed Eleanor's arrival. Not yet. Just as Eleanor spotted Vivian, a tall, distinguished man with silver temples and kind, discerning eyes stepped forward from a discreet waiting area. Mr. Harrison, their longtime financial advisor, a man who had guided Henry through astute investments for decades and had been Eleanor's quiet confidant since Henry's passing. He carried a substantial stack of documents, his brow slightly furrowed with a mixture of professionalism and a deeply personal concern. He approached Eleanor, his voice a low, deferential murmur. "Edna," he began, using the familiar, cherished nickname only Henry and a select few had ever used. "I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this?" His eyes, warm and searching, held a silent plea for reconsideration, an unspoken acknowledgement of the gravity of the decision they were about to enact. Eleanor didn't waver. Her gaze flickered back to Vivian, still oblivious, still immersed in her world of numbers and transactions. The scene felt almost surreal, two parallel realities coexisting in the same space. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Robert," she replied, her voice unwavering, infused with a quiet strength that surprised even herself. "Let's proceed." Mr. Harrison nodded, a subtle tightening of his lips, a silent acceptance of her unyielding resolve. He led her past the busy teller lines, past the curious glances of other customers, to a private office situated at the far end of the bank. The room was tastefully appointed, designed for confidentiality, its walls seemingly absorbing sound, creating a cocoon of privacy. Eleanor settled into a plush leather chair opposite a large mahogany desk, while Mr. Harrison took the seat usually reserved for the bank's own executives. For the next 2 hours, the air in the office was thick with the rustle of papers, the low murmur of Mr. Harrison's explanations, and the occasional click of a pen. Eleanor signed document after document, her hand steady, her focus unwavering. The transaction was monumental. The liquidation of decades of carefully managed investments, the transfer of a vast, hidden fortune. It was a complex dance of financial instruments, an intricate unraveling of a legacy that had been built on discretion and foresight. Eleanor listened, understood, and signed, her mind picturing Vivian's face, not as it was now, but as it had been yesterday, hardened by contempt. Finally, Mr. Harrison pushed the last stack of papers across the desk, a faint smile playing on his lips, a testament to the efficient completion of an extraordinary task. He leaned forward slightly, his voice a low, confidential tone. "The funds have been transferred as requested, Eleanor. $260 million. Minus taxes and fees, of course. The entire portfolio, liquidated and moved." Eleanor felt a slight tremor, a ripple of the immense power she now wielded. It was a strange sensation, not of greed, but of immense, almost terrifying, control. "And the destination?" Mr. Harrison prompted, his eyes once again searching hers, offering one last opportunity for a change of heart. "Are you absolutely certain about the recipient?" Eleanor met his gaze squarely. "Yes, Robert. Absolutely certain." With the transaction complete, a quiet sense of finality settled over Eleanor. She rose from the chair, the leather briefcase now feeling lighter, yet somehow more significant. She walked out of the private office, back into the main lobby, her steps deliberate, unhurried, almost regal. The hum of the bank, the soft clatter of keyboards, the hushed conversations, all seemed to fade into the background. Her destination was clear. She approached Vivian's window, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Vivian was just finishing with a customer, her expression a practiced blend of professionalism and slight weariness. As the customer walked away, Vivian looked up, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. Her face, initially neutral, immediately tightened with a visible ripple of annoyance. "Mom," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a low, exasperated whisper. "What are you doing here? I told you yesterday. I can't help you with money. My hands are tied." The implied accusation, the instant assumption of dependency, was like a familiar, dull ache. Eleanor's smile widened, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not here to ask for money, sweetheart," she replied, her voice soft, calm, almost melodic in its controlled delivery. "I'm here to make a transaction." Vivian rolled her eyes, a gesture of impatience that Eleanor knew all too well. "What kind of transaction?" she scoffed, her tone dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "Your Social Security direct deposit is already set up. You know that." A small, almost imperceptible smile played on Eleanor's lips as she reached into Henry's briefcase. She pulled out a pristine white withdrawal slip, already filled out in her neat, unhurried hand. The sum was precise, overwhelming, a number that would make even Vivian, the astute banker, pause. She slid it across the polished counter, directly into Vivian's waiting slot. Vivian, still absorbed in her annoyance, barely glanced at the slip. Her fingers, accustomed to dealing with figures, reached for it with a practiced, dismissive air. She was about to process it, no doubt assuming a small withdrawal for groceries or some other trivial expense Eleanor might have. But then her eyes registered the number. The casual movement of her hand faltered, her gaze snapped back to the slip. A double take, swift and involuntary. The color drained from her face, leaving her complexion ashen. "Mom," Vivian whispered, her voice barely audible, the professional facade cracking under the weight of the impossible digits. Her hands, usually so steady as she counted cash or stamped documents, now trembled visibly. This can't be right. "You wrote down $260 million. The last words were a choked gasp. A question steeped in disbelief and burgeoning fear. Eleanor met her daughter's wide, disbelieving eyes. Her own gaze was calm, unwavering. "That's correct, sweetheart," she confirmed, her voice soft, yet resonating with an authority Vivian rarely heard. Vivian's head shook slowly, a desperate attempt to dislodge the impossible reality. No, this is a joke," she stammered, her composure rapidly unraveling. Her professional instincts kicked in, attempting to rationalize the absurdity. You can't just write down money you don't have, Mom. This isn't how it works." There was a hint of condescension in her tone, even now, a lingering assumption of Eleanor's naivety. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, but one filled with steel. "Check the account, Vivian." The simple command, delivered with such quiet certainty, pierced through Vivian's rising panic. With trembling fingers, she typed in the account number Eleanor had provided, her eyes fixed on the screen, a desperate hope flickering that this was indeed some elaborate, inexplicable prank. The system whirred, loaded, and then the figures appeared, stark and undeniable. Vivian's eyes, those calculating green eyes, grew impossibly wide. Her jaw went slack. She stared at the balance, the rows of numbers confirming the unfathomable truth. $264,700,000 and change. The exact figure, down to the last cent, glittered mockingly on the screen. Eleanor watched her daughter's face contort through a kaleidoscope of emotions: disbelief, shock, dawning horror. "Your father," Eleanor began, her voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos erupting within Vivian, "was a very successful investor." Vivian. "He also founded a tech company that did remarkably well. We just chose to live simply. We believed true wealth wasn't about showing off." Vivian's face completely drained of color, leaving it paper white. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. Finally, a choked whisper escaped her lips. You're a millionaire." "All this time?" Eleanor allowed a thin, mirthless smile to curve her lips. "I was," she corrected, emphasizing the past tense, her voice laced with a subtle, cutting irony. "The money has already been transferred. The account, as you'll see, is now empty. Completely empty." Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes wide with unadulterated panic. Her voice, no longer a whisper, rose in a frantic, desperate crescendo, drawing the attention of nearby colleagues and customers. "Transferred where?" "Mom, what are you talking about? Where did you transfer it?" Eleanor straightened, her posture regal, unyielding. "That's not your concern, dear," she stated, her voice now cool, detached, devoid of any maternal warmth. "I just wanted you to know that the woman you called a sanguisuga yesterday, the Leech, who was supposedly living off your generosity, actually had more money than you'll ever see in your lifetime. Many, many times over." With that, Eleanor reached for Henry's briefcase, snapping it shut with a definitive click. She turned to leave, her statement hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation and undeniable truth. The weight of the moment was palpable, drawing stares from people who now realized something extraordinary was unfolding. "Mom, wait!" Vivian's frantic voice, laced with a desperation Eleanor had never heard, sliced through the stunned silence. She was already rushing around the counter, her professional composure utterly shattered, her movements clumsy, propelled by a primal fear. "Mom, I think there's been some mistake. You can't just give away that much money." As she spoke, she gestured wildly, trying to catch the eye of her supervisor, who was now hurrying over, drawn by the commotion. Vivian reached Eleanor, her hands grasping at her arm, her eyes pleading, frantic. "It's not safe, Mom. You could be taken advantage of. People will try to exploit you." The irony of her words was a bitter taste on Eleanor's tongue. Vivian, who had openly exploited her own mother, was now feigning concern for her safety. I didn't know," Vivian stammered, her voice thick with unshed tears, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "Please, Mom, we need to talk about this. We need to fix this." Eleanor gently but firmly detached Vivian's clutching fingers from her arm. She looked her daughter directly in the eye, her gaze clear and unwavering. "I'm not upset, Vivian," she stated, her voice calm, almost serene, a chilling contrast to Vivian's hysteria. "I'm finally thinking clearly. If you've been gripped by Eleanor's story so far, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss how this incredible journey unfolds. What do you think Vivian deserves? Let us know in the comments below." Vivian's hand was still clamped around Eleanor's arm, her grip surprisingly strong, her nails digging in slightly. Her eyes, usually so composed and calculating, now swam with a desperate fear, stripped bare of all pretension. "Where did it go, Mom?" Tell me. Who is it for? Is it some scam? People prey on elderly people, Mom. You have to tell me. Her voice was shrill, barely contained, drawing more curious stares from the bank's clientele. Eleanor felt a peculiar sensation, almost a sardonic amusement. Vivian, the sharp, cynical banker, was desperate to believe her mother had been conned. Rather than confront the uncomfortable truth of Eleanor's deliberate agency, it was easier for Vivian to imagine her mother as a victim, a fragile old woman taken advantage of, than as a powerful force capable of making such a monumental decision. The money is exactly where I want it to be, Vivian, Eleanor stated, her voice firm, cutting through the rising hysteria. She looked pointedly at her arm, and Vivian's grip momentarily slackened. Just then, Mr. Wheeler, Vivian's supervisor, a stout man with a perpetually anxious expression, arrived at their side, his face a mask of polite concern. He had clearly overheard the commotion. "Vivian, is everything all right here?" he asked, his gaze flickering between the distraught Vivian and the strangely composed Eleanor. Vivian turned to him, her face contorted, her professionalism utterly abandoned. "Mr. Wheeler, my mother. She just transferred over $200 million out of an account here. I think she's not thinking clearly. She's elderly, and she could be susceptible to fraud. We need to stop it, reverse it." She was practically hyperventilating, her words tumbling out in a torrent of panic. Eleanor turned to Mr. Wheeler, a calm, reassuring smile on her face. "There is no issue, Mr. Wheeler," she interjected, her voice even and perfectly audible. "The transaction was completed entirely with my full knowledge and intent, and I assure you, I am perfectly competent." Every I was dotted, every T was crossed. "With Mr. Harrison himself facilitating the transfer in your private office." She emphasized the last part, a subtle jab at Vivian's lack of knowledge, and a clear signal that this was not some impulsive act. Vivian, however, was beyond reason. She grabbed Eleanor's arm again, more forcefully this time, her eyes burning with an almost manic intensity. "Mom, please, just come home. We can call Mr. Harrison. We can reverse it. We can get the money back. Think about what you're doing." Eleanor looked at her daughter's face. Truly looked at it. She saw not love, not concern for her well-being, but pure, unadulterated panic at the prospect of a fortune lost. A potential inheritance vanished into thin air. The realization solidified the concrete wall she had begun to build between them. "Yesterday, Vivian," Eleanor began, her voice low, measured, but imbued with a sharp edge. "When I asked you for a mere $100, you called me a leech. You told me to get a job. You accused me of being lazy, entitled, a burden." The words, once so painful, now felt like weapons in her hands, wielded with precision. Vivian flinched as if physically struck. Her grip on Eleanor's arm loosened, then fell away entirely. "Mom, no, I didn't mean it like that. I was stressed. You know how it gets at work. Of course I love you. She trailed off, scrambling for an excuse, a justification. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, a flicker of cold amusement in her eyes. "Oh, you didn't mean it like that? So, a mere $100, and I'm a bloodsucker, but $260 million, and suddenly you love me, and you're worried about my well-being?" She allowed the silence to hang heavy between them, the hypocrisy stark and undeniable. Vivian's face crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes, real tears this time, born of shock and desperate loss. "It was just a bad day. Mom, you know how stressed I get. You know how I get when I'm under pressure?" Eleanor looked at her, her expression unreadable. "Yes, Vivian," she replied, her voice soft, almost mournful. With a gentle but decisive motion, Eleanor removed Vivian's hand, which had once again reached out to clutch her. She straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and gathered her composure. "I need to go home," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the stunned silence of the bank lobby, "and pack my things. I'll be moving out by the end of the week." Vivian gasped, a raw, wounded sound. "Move out? Mom, no. Where will you go?" You can't just leave. Her voice was barely a coherent thought, a desperate plea born of utter confusion and terror. Eleanor didn't answer. She simply turned and began to walk towards the exit, her steps even and unhurried. Behind her, Vivian's voice, now a desperate, broken wail, echoed through the bank, calling her name. "Mom! Eleanor! Please!" The cries were tinged with a raw, agonizing desperation. Her professional reputation, her carefully constructed world, shattering around her. Eleanor didn't look back. She pushed through the glass doors, the sunlight on her face a welcome warmth. As she drove away from the bank, she glanced in her rearview mirror. Vivian was standing in the parking lot, a solitary, desperate figure, lost amidst the gleaming cars, her face a mask of shock and despair. And in that moment, Eleanor remembered the word sanguisuga, and a cold, grim satisfaction settled in her heart. The drive home was punctuated by the insistent chirping of Eleanor's phone. Vivian. Each call went straight to voicemail, a silent testament to Eleanor's unwavering resolve. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if observing a drama unfold from a distance. With herself as both the protagonist and an impartial judge, the anger had solidified into a cold, clear determination, stripping away the last vestiges of sentimentality that had once bound her to her daughter. As Eleanor pulled into the driveway, Vivian's luxury sedan was already there, parked haphazardly. Vivian herself was pacing frantically on the manicured lawn, her perfect blonde bun disheveled, her expensive suit rumpled. Her carefully applied makeup was smeared, tracing paths of recent tears down her pale cheeks. The picture of professional composure had completely evaporated, replaced by raw anxiety and desperation. The moment Eleanor stepped out of her car, Vivian rushed towards her, her eyes wide and pleading. "Mom! Oh, thank God you're home. We need to talk. I was so worried." Her voice was artificially sweet, cloying, a stark contrast to the venom she'd spewed just yesterday. "I'm so sorry about what I said yesterday. I had a really difficult client, and I was just so stressed. You know how work gets." The excuses poured out, a frantic attempt to mend what she clearly perceived as a temporary rift. Eleanor didn't respond. She simply walked past Vivian, her face impassive, and inserted her key into the lock of the front door. Vivian followed close behind, her words a rapid-fire torrent. "We can fix this, Mom. I'm sure it's not too late. Mr. Harrison is a good man, but he doesn't understand family. Your father. He'd be heartbroken to see you just give away his legacy like that." The mention of Henry, Vivian's convenient invocation of his memory, felt like a sacrilege. Eleanor could almost feel Henry's quiet disapproval at such blatant manipulation. She saw past the feigned concern, the artificial sweetness, to the raw calculation and desperation that flickered in Vivian's eyes. It was about the money. Always about the money. Eleanor stepped inside, Vivian practically tripping over her heels to keep up. As they entered the pristine living room, Eleanor turned, her gaze fixing on Vivian. "You know, Vivian," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "you called me a bloodsucker yesterday." Vivian's face crumpled in an instant denial. "Mom, I would never say something like that. You're my mother." The lie was brazen, delivered with a conviction that might have fooled someone less intimately familiar with Vivian's selective memory. Eleanor's eyebrows arched slightly. "Oh. No? You used the word sanguisuga. Do you remember that, Vivian? You remember how deliberately you chose that word? How you savored the sound of it as it left your lips? The Italian word for bloodsucker. You looked it up, didn't you? You used it to hurt me, to cut me down, to make me feel utterly worthless." Vivian recoiled as if slapped. The carefully constructed apology, the performance of regret, began to crack. She stammered, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Mom, please. Let's just focus on fixing the situation. The bank has a fraud department. We can say you were coerced." Eleanor cut her off, her voice devoid of emotion. "I was coerced only by my own conscience, Vivian. By the realization that I could no longer endure living under the roof of a daughter who openly despises me." Vivian's lower lip trembled. But Mom, that money. $260 million. You could have lived like a queen. You could have bought anything you ever wanted. We could have. I could have helped you enjoy it. The last sentence hung in the air, a stark revelation of Vivian's true lament. It wasn't about Eleanor's lost comfort or security. It was about what she had lost. The access to that vast fortune that had been tantalizingly close, yet utterly out of reach. Helped me enjoy it? Eleanor repeated, a bitter edge to her voice. Is that what you call treating your mother like a burden? Calling her lazy? A leech? Reminding her daily that she was living off your charity? Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, powerful whisper. Do you remember telling me that I was a burden? That you were tired of supporting me? Vivian flinched, her gaze falling to the expensive Persian rug. Her shoulders slumped. I admit, Mom. Sometimes I did. I got tired. You were just always hovering around. In my space. I just wanted my own life. The admission, raw and brutally honest, hung between them, confirming Eleanor's deepest fears. In that moment, Eleanor understood. Vivian hadn't taken her in out of love, or even out of a sense of filial duty. It had been an obligation, a social expectation, a box to check on the list of a successful daughter's responsibilities, and Vivian had resented every single moment of it. The realization, though painful, brought with it a strange, liberating clarity. Eleanor looked at her daughter, her heart heavy, yet resolute. You don't have to feel obligated anymore, Vivian, she said, her voice now calm, definitive. She turned, leaving Vivian standing alone in the opulent living room, and walked towards her own small bedroom, already envisioning the meticulous process of packing her belongings. The next 3 days passed in a strange, strained silence, punctuated by Vivian's increasingly desperate attempts at reconciliation. Eleanor packed methodically, carefully folding her clothes, sorting through cherished mementos from her life with Henry. Her small bedroom, once a sanctuary, now felt like a temporary holding cell. Vivian, meanwhile, oscillated between profound periods of ignoring Eleanor entirely and launching into elaborate, tearful apologies. Her sudden transformation into the devoted daughter was almost comical in its transparency. Vivian would appear with a freshly brewed cup of Eleanor's favorite herbal tea, offering a forced smile. She'd suggest they go out for lunch, or volunteer to help Eleanor pack, her hands hovering awkwardly over Eleanor's boxes. She even proposed a mother-daughter spa day, an unheard-of gesture from a woman who usually claimed to be too busy for such frivolities. Eleanor saw through it all. Of course, this newfound kindness wasn't born of genuine remorse or rediscovered affection. It was clearly calculated. Every act, a transparent attempt to soften Eleanor, to maneuver her into reconsidering her financial decision. On the third evening, as Eleanor was carefully wrapping a porcelain figurine Henry had given her years ago, Vivian appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed, a crumpled tissue clutched in her hand. She stood there for a moment, letting the silence build, a tactic Eleanor knew well. Then, her voice thick with manufactured emotion, she said, "Mom, please. We're all we have left, especially since Dad passed. He would be so disappointed to see us like this." She was weaponizing Henry's memory, twisting his love into a tool for guilt. Eleanor paused her packing, placing the figurine gently into a box. She looked at Vivian, her gaze steady. "You should have thought about that, Vivian," she replied, her voice quiet, almost weary. "Before you called me a bloodsucker." Vivian gasped. A dramatic, aggrieved sound. "But I've apologized 100 times, Mom. How many more times do I have to say I'm sorry before you forgive me? What more do you want from me?" Her frustration was evident, mixed with a growing sense of injustice. Eleanor simply looked at her, a profound sadness settling in her eyes. "It's not the apology itself, Vivian," she explained, her voice soft but firm. "It's when it started. The apologies only began after you realized I wasn't the penniless burden you imagined. If I were still broke, still the leech you believed me to be, would you be standing here now, begging for forgiveness? Would you even care?" Vivian opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. The truth of Eleanor's statement hung heavy in the air, undeniable. A flush crept up Vivian's neck, betraying her guilt. You've never truly apologized for anything that mattered. Vivian, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a quiet power. Not for your rudeness, your contempt, your constant put-downs. I always made excuses for you, attributed it to stress, to your demanding job. I avoided facing the truth of what kind of person you had become. What kind of daughter you were. Vivian began to pace, agitated, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. So? You think I'm a monster? You think I don't love you? My own mother? She demanded, her voice rising. I think, Eleanor responded, watching her daughter with a detached curiosity, that you love the idea of a mother, a quiet, background figure who asks for nothing, who is always there, but never really present with her own needs or dignity. You don't love me, the person. You love the convenience of having me around, without any of the actual responsibility of a human relationship. Vivian stopped pacing, her face a mask of confusion. I still don't understand. Mom, this is about one argument, one bad day. No, Vivian. Eleanor interrupted gently. This isn't about one argument. This is about a lifetime. A lifetime of feeling like I don't matter. A lifetime of enduring your thinly veiled contempt, your casual disrespect, your constant reminders of my supposed dependency. Tears streamed down Vivian's face again, but these felt more genuine, tinged with a dawning, terrible understanding. I was angry, Mom! She cried out, her voice raw. I was tired of feeling responsible for someone else's happiness. I work so hard. And I just felt... Eleanor looked at her with a quiet, heartbreaking clarity. I asked you for $100, Vivian. I never asked you to be responsible for my happiness. That was a burden you placed on yourself, and then resented me for. Vivian wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Can't we just go back to the way things were before? She pleaded, her voice small and broken. I'll try harder. I promise. I'll be better. Eleanor felt a deep, profound sadness. Vivian still didn't understand. She saw this as a temporary crisis, a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over, rather than a fundamental flaw in how she valued her own mother. The way things were before wasn't working, sweetheart, Eleanor said softly, closing the last box and securing it with tape. I was miserable, and you were resentful. It wasn't fair to either of us. She straightened, looking directly at Vivian. I've rented a small apartment. It's across town, clean and comfortable. I'll be perfectly fine. Vivian's eyes widened in fresh panic. An apartment? Mom, you always hated apartment living. You need a garden. You need space. The excuses, the desperate pleas, continued. But Eleanor simply shook her head, her decision made. Her spirit finally free. Eleanor gently closed the lid of her modest suitcase. It was a well-worn piece of luggage, unlike the designer sets Vivian favored, but it contained everything Eleanor truly needed. I've changed my mind about a lot of things lately, Vivian, she said, her voice soft but firm, an echo of the certainty that had now become her guiding principle. I'll only be taking what I need. Vivian stood in the doorway, her shoulders slumped, her face a tear-streaked mask of desperation. She knew she was losing, and in a final, frantic attempt to regain control, she pulled her last, most potent card. What about Dad, Mom? She whispered, her voice barely audible, yet laced with accusation. What would he think about you tearing our family apart like this? He loved us. He loved our family. A surge of clarity, cool and decisive, washed over Eleanor. For too long, she had allowed Vivian to twist Henry's memory, to use it as a weapon. Your father, Vivian, Eleanor stated, her voice steady, would be heartbroken by who you've become. Not by me leaving. She looked directly at her daughter, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. Henry taught kindness, generosity, and valuing people over money. Lessons you, my dear, have clearly forgotten. Eleanor watched Vivian flinch, the raw truth hitting its mark. Then, Eleanor posed a question, her voice dropping to a challenging whisper. Tell me, Vivian, if I walked into your bank, a complete stranger, and asked for help, how would you treat me? Vivian hesitated, her mind scrambling for an acceptable answer. She knew the professional code, the customer service mantra. I would be professional, she whispered, her voice tight, barely audible. Professional, Eleanor repeated, a slight, knowing smile touching her lips. Yes, I suppose you would. But professional isn't kind, is it? It's not compassionate, it's not empathetic. And that, Vivian, is the difference. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's just control. She closed the latches of her suitcase with a soft click, a sound of finality. I'm done, Vivian. Done being taken for granted. Done making excuses for your cruelty. I'm done. With that, Eleanor picked up her suitcase. She walked past Vivian, who stood frozen in the doorway, her manipulative words finally failing her, leaving her utterly defeated. Eleanor didn't look back as she left the house, not even when she heard Vivian's choked sob, a sound that quickly dissolved into a defeated slump onto the floor. 6 months later, Eleanor thrived. Her modest, 2-bedroom apartment, while a fraction of the size of Vivian's opulent house, felt like a palace of peace. The small balcony overlooked a vibrant park, and she had filled the living room with cozy furniture and vibrant houseplants. She had started a small gardening club with her new neighbors, Clara and George, kind-hearted retirees who shared her love for simple pleasures. They had weekly dinners, full of laughter and genuine companionship. One Tuesday, over a pot of Clara's famous chicken and dumpling soup, Clara mentioned, You know, I saw Vivian down at the market the other day. She looked tired. Asked about you, actually. Said she hoped you were well. Eleanor sighed, stirring her soup. I'm sure she did, she replied, a faint sadness in her voice. She knew Vivian still thought this was about the money, that Eleanor had chosen a fortune over her family, rather than choosing her dignity over emotional abuse. Vivian would never understand. Eleanor's phone still received the occasional call or message from Vivian. They were always the same, carefully worded apologies that never quite hit the mark, blaming stress or external factors, or subtle attempts at guilt-tripping. I know Dad would want us to be a family, one message read. I miss you, Mom. We should talk about things, another pleaded, always without genuine remorse, always with an underlying agenda. Eleanor simply deleted them, her resolve unshakable. She knew a true apology, one born of genuine self-reflection and a desire for change, would never come. And even if it did, the years of accumulated pain had created too wide a chasm. George, ever perceptive, sensing Eleanor's lingering thoughts, reached across the table and patted her hand. Sometimes, Eleanor, he said gently, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to show them there are consequences for their actions. It might be the only way they learn. Later that week, another voicemail arrived from Vivian. This one was different. Her voice sounded strained, almost hollow. Mom, she began. I've started therapy. They're talking about boundary issues and emotional expression. Eleanor listened to the message, her heart feeling a flicker of something, perhaps a faint hope, quickly overshadowed by a stronger sense of self-preservation. She simply deleted the message. She wasn't responsible for Vivian's healing, and she wouldn't allow herself to be drawn back into the cycle of manipulation. Her peace was too precious. The following morning, Eleanor visited Henry's grave. The sun warmed her face as she placed a fresh bouquet of wildflowers on his headstone. I did it, Henry, she whispered, a soft smile on her lips. I kept our simple life, most of the money, all that absurd wealth. I've given it to charities, places that truly help people, just like you would have wanted. I'm living simply, just as we always did. A profound sense of peace settled over her. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, taught crafting classes at the senior center, and discovered a joy in connecting with people who saw her, Eleanor, for her warmth, her wisdom, her kindness, not for what she could provide, or what she represented. She felt useful again, truly useful. Eleanor realized that Vivian's cruelty, in its own twisted way, had been a gift. It had been the catalyst that shattered her complacency, awakening a dormant self-worth she hadn't known she possessed. She had allowed herself to be a victim for too long, clinging to the hope of a daughter who no longer existed. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. Vivian hadn't just lost a fortune. She had lost something far more valuable. A mother's unconditional love. A love that had once been boundless, but which now, finally, had found its boundaries. That night, Eleanor slept soundly, surrounded by the quiet contentment of her new, self-valued life.